I'm Charles Dennis, Director of ITDA. In the previous clip we talked about building a model, how you can do research by modelling. Your model can be built to build new theory, or you can build your model to test existing theory. An important part of modelling is scales, that is, if you're doing your modelling by quantitative techniques. So in this clip we're going to talk about scales. I'm Charles Dennis, Director of ITDA. In the previous clip we looked at building a model. Now, if the model is a quantitative model tested using a structured questionnaire, then the questions need to reflect the variables. To reflect the variables, these are scales. So just to illustrate, this is a scale taken from a paper on adoption of internet banking. And one of the variables in adoption of internet banking might be perceived usefulness. Well, another author, Wang, in 2003, investigated perceived usefulness in banking, and as a result produced a scale that's psychrometrically validated. That means it was shown to be valid and reliable. Because it was shown to be valid and reliable and reported in a refereed good quality journal, then we can use that scale directly. And that's a scale which has 3 items in it. Now, every scale needs to have, ideally, at least 3 items, and preferably 4 or 5. In the case of perceived usefulness, it's represented by improves banking performance, by easier to conduct banking, and by useful for banking transactions. So each of these items are questions on the questionnaire which are asked using a Likert scale, which means it's a scale that goes from disagree strongly to agree strongly, with a 5-point or a 7-point scale. But what if there isn't a prior scale that's been psychrometrically validated and shown to be reliable in a quality refereed journal? Well, in that case, or in the case that you need to add variables to your model, or you think it appropriate to add questionnaire items, then you need to develop your own scale. Now, there's a well-known procedure for developing scales which comes from Churchill, 1979. Though there have been other suggestions, this is a usual and useful basis for questionnaire development. The first, if there's a new topic that hasn't been quantitatively studied before, is the literature search, searching for ideas often from qualitative prior studies, and listing all of those ideas, then carrying out qualitative work with respondents, for instance in focus groups, aimed at eliciting what might be the constructs of a particular variable. So asking people in focus groups what they think might be relevant to perceived usefulness, for instance. The next stage, you have a lot of these, might be hundreds, and get experts to sort them into clusters that are really representing more or less the same thing. Once those have been done, they can be used to make a questionnaire. Now that questionnaire can be subject to scale purification. That means reducing the number of items, reducing those items that are not as useful. That's done by exploratory factor analysis. And with exploratory factor analysis, you can see what are the dimensions of the constructs and drop the items that load lowest on the factors. Next step then is to draft a new questionnaire, send the questionnaire to experts and ask their opinion. Having modified the questionnaire as necessary on the basis of what experts in the field think about it, then produce a revised questionnaire, pilot that, perhaps with about 50 respondents, and then move from there to the main questionnaire survey, when hopefully you'd have a couple of hundred respondents, and again evaluate the scale using confirmatory factor analysis. Having used confirmatory factor analysis, then the next stage will be to use a structural equation modelling program to evaluate the strength of the associations between the constructs. So this is the example for the intention to adopt internet banking, and showing, for instance, that the strong link, which is 0.6, that's the standardised coefficient, the coefficient shown on a 0 to 1 scale, between perceived manageability and perceived usefulness. So perceived manageability, it influences attitudinal intentions to adopt internet banking, but only via perceived usefulness. That means perceived usefulness is mediating the relationship between perceived manageability and attitudinal intentions. Now that's an important mediation, because the relationship between perceived usefulness and attitudinal intentions to adopt internet banking is actually moderated by the national culture. And that is, that relationship is much stronger in Saudi Arabia with a coefficient of 0.7 compared to the United Kingdom with a coefficient of 0.5. So perceived usefulness is more important for Saudi customers than it is to UK customers, and that difference is actually statistically significant, showing that there is a moderation effect of national culture. So thank you for listening to Scales, and I hope that you have enjoyed and found useful this series on modelling and research and theory.